The cabin lights of Royal Meridian Flight 447 blazed at full brightness, an unnatural glare that turned the beige leather seats into interrogation chambers. Marcus Wright sat motionless in 1A, wrists bound behind his back with industrial-grade flex cuffs that bit into his skin with each shallow breath. A thin line of blood traced down his left forearm where the plastic had broken through. His face held no expression, not defiance, not fear, just the terrible calm of a man who'd already calculated every outcome and accepted the cost of each one. Rebecca Carlyle stood 3 feet away, radio pressed to her lips, voice shaking with what she probably thought was righteous authority. "Officers, we have the suspect secured in first class. He became aggressive when confronted. We need immediate assistance upon landing."
200 pairs of eyes watched from economy and business class, faces pressed against the gap in the curtain, phones recording, whispers building into a low roar of judgment. A man in 4D kept repeating the same phrase. I saw him walking around, like a chant, like proof, like enough. Marcus closed his eyes. Sarah's face appeared, not the hollowed version from those final hospital weeks, but the woman who'd laughed at his jokes in grad school, who'd worn his MIT hoodie on their first date, who'd made him promise on her deathbed to never let money change who he was. 3 years dead, and she still had more influence over his choices than any board of directors ever would. The plane shuddered as it began its descent into Billings, Montana. Through the window, mountains scraped against a sky the color of old bruises. Marcus had never been to Montana, had never planned to be here.
But then again, he'd never planned to be zip-tied in the aircraft he secretly owned, accused of stealing a bracelet he'd never touched, by crew members who saw his skin and his hoodie and decided they knew exactly what kind of man he was. The worst part wasn't the plastic cutting into his wrists. It was the way Rebecca had whispered it, leaning close so only he could hear. "You picked the wrong flight. You thought you could steal from rich people? Montana police will handle you." Not the police. Montana police. Like geography mattered. Like justice changed based on altitude. Marcus opened his eyes and looked directly at her. His voice came out soft, almost kind. "You have no idea who you're dealing with." She laughed. Actually laughed. The sound triggered something in his chest, not anger, but a cold, mechanical certainty. The same feeling he got when he signed termination papers or authorized security protocols. A decision made. A line crossed. His bound hands found the satellite phone in his hoodie's kangaroo pocket. The Garmin InReach Mini weighed almost nothing, cost $1,200, and had one red button that would change everything. He pressed it. The screen lit up silent and blue. Code black activated. Rebecca lunged, snatched the phone from his grip, stared at the message like it was written in a foreign language. "What is this? Who did you call?" "Nobody, it's automatic." Marcus settled back into his seat, wrists screaming. "And now my entire security team knows exactly where I am, what happened, and who did it." She threw the phone into the galley trash, triumph bright in her eyes. "Your security team can talk to Montana police." The plane dropped through another layer of altitude. Marcus whispered something too quiet for anyone to hear, words meant for a woman 3 years in the ground. "Sarah, I hope you're not watching this. You'd be furious." But he could imagine her response, sharp and immediate. "I'm furious you're letting them treat you like this. I'm not letting them. I'm documenting them." 4 hours earlier, the universe had looked completely different. Manhattan at 6 in the morning smelled like exhaust and ambition. The kind of city that never fully slept because too many people were grinding towards something they'd probably never reach. Marcus Wright moved through his penthouse in boxer shorts and an old Princeton t-shirt, feet silent on bamboo floors that cost more than most people's annual salaries. The space was tasteful, Minimalist furniture, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park, original Basquiat on one wall, but it didn't feel like wealth. It felt like a hotel room occupied by someone who'd never fully unpacked. He stopped at Daniel's bedroom door. 12 years old and already taller than most kids his age, his son slept sprawled across a queen bed, one arm hanging off the edge, mouth slightly open. The boy looked so much like Sarah, it physically hurt sometimes. Same cheekbones, same way his nose wrinkled when he was deep in REM, same stubborn cowlick that refused all attempts at control. Marcus didn't wake him,
Just stood there for 30 seconds, watching the rise and fall of his chest before moving to the kitchen. He left a note on the island, blocky handwriting on Cornell letterhead he'd stolen from his own office. Daniel, Dad's flying to Seattle for the Boeing meeting. Mrs. Patterson will pick you up after school. I'll call you tonight. Love you, son. P.S. Don't forget your Python homework is due Friday. The Boeing merger was worth $8 billion. 18 months of negotiations, due diligence, regulatory review. Today was supposed to be the final presentation, the moment when Marcus convinced a room full of old aerospace engineers that a black man from Newark who'd built his fortune in defense technology knew more about their business than they did. He'd been preparing for weeks, had the pitch memorized, had already mentally spent the integration budget, but standing in his kitchen at 6:15 in the morning, staring at his son's note, Marcus felt the same hollow uncertainty that had plagued him since Sarah died. What was the point of building an empire if the only person he wanted to share it with was gone? What did $8 billion matter if he missed Daniel's childhood chasing it? He packed light, one North Face backpack, the same model he'd used in grad school, now 15 years old and held together with duct tape in 3 places. Laptop, charger, one change of clothes, deodorant, protein bar. No suit. He'd change at the hotel in Seattle. The Boeing executives expected him in Armani or Tom Ford, some statement of success. They'd get Marcus in whatever he felt like wearing when he rolled out of bed. Sarah had always hated the suit and tie performance. "You look like you're wearing someone else's skin," she'd told him once, maybe 6 months before the diagnosis. They'd been getting ready for some gala, some charity thing where rich people paid $5,000 a plate to feel good about themselves. Just be you. That's enough. He'd worn a suit anyway. The performance mattered back then. The appearance of success, the signaling, the careful dance of respectability politics that let a black CEO exist in spaces that didn't want him. But Sarah was gone now, and the only person he needed to impress was a 12-year-old who thought his dad was coolest when he was debugging code in a hoodie at 2 in the morning. So, gray Nike hoodie, black joggers, training shoes. The outfit of a man headed to the gym, not a boardroom. Let Boeing be confused. Let them underestimate him. Underestimation was a weapon he'd been sharpening since freshman year at Princeton, when his roommate's parents asked if he was there on a basketball scholarship. Marcus grabbed his phone, his wallet, black Amex Centurion card visible through the ID window, and his wedding ring from the nightstand. He still wore it. Probably always would. Some performances you kept up even when the audience was dead. The Uber pulled up at 6:45. Not a company car, not a limo, just a regular black Toyota Camry driven by a guy named Mike who spent the entire ride to JFK talking about his daughter's volleyball team. Marcus half listened, offered appropriate encouraging sounds, and thought about Daniel's upcoming coding competition. The kid had built an AI that could analyze blood samples for early cancer markers. At 12. Using YouTube tutorials and library computers because Marcus had insisted on making him earn his own setup. "You're a good father," Sarah had told him once. "Better than you think." He'd been trying to live up to that assessment ever since. JFK Terminal 4 smelled like coffee and stress. Marcus moved through the crowd with practiced anonymity, just another body in a hoodie carrying a backpack. Nothing about him suggesting that he owned 54% of the airline whose terminal he was currently walking through. He bought into Royal Meridian 3 years ago, right after Sarah's funeral, using a maze of shell companies and legal structures so complex that even the board didn't know their majority shareholders' real identity. It was a defensive play. He traveled constantly, needed reliable aircraft, didn't trust anyone else to maintain the safety standards that mattered when you had a kid depending on you to come home. The investment had been quiet, strategic, invisible. Until today, apparently. The first-class priority lane stretched before him, marked by red velvet ropes and a gold sign that dripped with manufactured exclusivity. Behind the podium stood Gary Hendricks, 46 years old according to the background check Marcus's team had run 3 seconds after he'd filed the complaint. 18 years with Royal Meridian, 3 citations for passenger conflicts, 1 pending lawsuit from a family who claimed he'd racially profiled their teenage daughter. Marcus ducked under the rope. Gary's head snapped up, eyes tracking from the backpack to the hoodie to Marcus's face. And something shifted in his expression. A micro-movement of disgust, or fear, or both. "Excuse me, sir, you're in the wrong lane." The words landed exactly as intended. Dismissive, territorial, designed to humiliate. Marcus stopped, pulled out his AirPods, let the silence stretch for 2 full seconds. "This is first-class check-in for Flight 447 to Seattle, right?" "It is." Gary's smile had no warmth in it. "Which is why you need to be over there." He pointed to the economy line, 50-plus people deep, snaking back toward the entrance, every single one of them now turning to watch the confrontation. "Economy check-in is that way." Behind Marcus, a woman muttered something about these people not knowing their place. A man in a $3,000 suit sighed dramatically, checking his Rolex like time was a commodity he couldn't afford to waste on this particular spectacle. Marcus pulled out his iPhone, opened the Royal Meridian app, turned the screen toward Gary. The boarding pass glowed gold around the edges, the company's visual shorthand for first class, for premium, for people who mattered. "I have seat 1A. Gary didn't reach for the scanner, didn't even glance at the phone, just stood there behind his podium like a gatekeeper at some exclusive club, power radiating from the cheap polyester of his uniform. "Sir, are you sure that ticket is legitimate?" The pause before legitimate carried its own accusation. Marcus felt something cold settle in his chest. The same sensation he got when reviewing quarterly reports that didn't add up, when someone was lying and thought he was too stupid to notice. Why wouldn't it be? First-class passengers typically have, Gary gestured vaguely at Marcus's outfit, his hands, his face, different attire. There it was. The thing they could never say directly, but always managed to communicate anyway. You don't look like you belong here. You don't dress right. You don't act right. You aren't right. The crowd behind Marcus had grown, people pressing forward to see the show, to watch this play out like it was entertainment instead of humiliation. Senator Richard Hayworth, Marcus recognized him from C-SPAN, tapped his foot impatiently. "Come on, I have a meeting in Seattle." A woman with a Chanel bag turned to her companion. "Why do they even try? It's embarrassing." Gary grabbed the scanner, movements sharp with vindication. "Let me check this. When it beeps red for fraud, I'm calling airport police." He aimed the laser at Marcus's phone screen. The machine chirped twice. Beep, beep, green light. The monitor behind Gary's desk flashed text. "Right, Marcus A. VIP Omega level. Seat 1A. Right Dynamics. Amex Centurion." Omega level. The highest tier in Royal Meridian system, reserved for heads of state, board members, diplomatic personnel. Gary stared at the screen like it had personally betrayed him, his face cycling through confusion and anger and something that might have been fear if he'd been smart enough to recognize the danger he was in. But he wasn't smart.
Or maybe he was just too committed to the performance, too deep in the script of how this was supposed to go. His voice rose, loud enough for the entire check-in area to hear. "The machine is glitching. This ticket is flagged as fraudulent. Stolen credit card, most likely." The crowd gasped. Actually gasped. Like this was theater.
Like Marcus's humiliation was the opening act they'd paid to see. The woman with the Chanel bag clutched her pearls, literally clutched them.
"Oh my God, he stole a ticket? Call security!" Gary's hand hovered over the phone, one call away from turning this into something that would follow Marcus for years, the kind of incident that lived forever on social media, that shaped narratives and destroyed reputations regardless of truth. A black man arrested at an airport for credit card fraud. The story wrote itself. Marcus kept his voice level, each word carefully measured. "I didn't steal anything. Check the corporate account. Right dynamics." Gary pulled up the billing information. His face went slack. $50,000 charged to an American Express Centurion card, the black card that required spending at least $250,000 annually just to qualify for.
Corporate account registered to Right Dynamics LLC, a company Gary had probably never heard of, but could Google in 3 seconds and discover was worth $18 billion. But even staring at proof, Gary couldn't let it go. Couldn't admit he'd been wrong. The cognitive dissonance must have been staggering. This can't be real. This man in a hoodie cannot possibly have this much money. The system must be broken. So he did what people always did when reality contradicted their prejudices. He doubled down. Gary printed a red form from the desk printer, slapped it on the counter. "Fraud suspected. Hold for verification." "Sir." The word came out harder than Marcus intended. "That card is registered to my company. The account has a credit line of $5 million. The charge is legitimate. Print my boarding pass." "I don't think so." Gary crossed his arms, and there it was. The full weight of petty authority, the small power of small men who spent their lives controlling access to things they'd never be able to afford themselves. "You can talk to my supervisor about this fraudulent ticket after airport police verify your identity." Marcus reached into his hoodie pocket, fingers finding his phone. One call to Tyrese, one sentence. "Gary Hendricks at JFK is refusing to board me." And this man's life would become exponentially more complicated. But even as he thought it, Sarah's voice echoed in his head. "Don't use a sledgehammer when a word will do." He never got the chance to decide. Gary's desk phone rang, a harsh electronic trill that made him jump. He snatched the receiver. "Hendricks." Whatever the person on the other end said made all the color drain from Gary's face. His eyes flicked to Marcus, then away, then back, like a man trying to reconcile two incompatible realities. "Yes, ma'am. I understand. Right away." He hung up, grabbed the boarding pass printer, hands shaking now, just slightly, enough to be visible. The machine spat out a ticket with a gold stripe along the edge. Gary shoved it across the counter like it might burn him if he held it too long. "Here." His voice had lost all its authority, replaced by something that might have been fear or confusion or both. "The crew will verify you on board." Not an apology, not even close. Just a threat, thinly veiled, that this wasn't over. Marcus took the boarding pass, met Gary's eyes, held them for 3 full seconds. "Thank you. Have a blessed day." The walk to security took 90 seconds, long enough for Marcus to feel the stares burning into his back, the whispers following him like a wake. Long enough to check his watch and confirm what he already knew. Whoever had called Gary had done it fast. Faster than any normal supervisor response, which meant someone had been watching. Someone who knew who Marcus was and had enough pull to override a gate agent's decision in real time. Interesting. He made it through TSA without incident. The officer barely glanced at his boarding pass, too busy arguing with a family about liquid restrictions, and found his gate with 40 minutes to spare. The waiting area was packed, a cross-section of American air travel in all its exhausted diversity. Families with kids zombified by iPads, business travelers hammering away at laptops, an elderly couple sharing a Cinnabon, arguing quietly about whose fault it was that they'd gotten to the airport 3 hours early. Marcus found a seat near the window, pulled out his laptop, tried to focus on the Boeing presentation. The numbers swam in front of his eyes. Integration costs, headcount reduction, synergy projections. The language of business, cold and analytical, designed to make human suffering sound like efficiency.
Flying alone? The voice belonged to the man in 1B, an older white guy with kind eyes and calloused hands. The kind of person who'd probably worked with his hands for 40 years before retiring to something easier. You look young to be traveling solo. Marcus almost laughed. At 42, he was many things, but young wasn't on the list. Then he realized the man was being genuine, not patronizing, just making conversation. Business trip. Merger presentation in Seattle. Ah. The man nodded sagely. I did 40 years at Boeing, engineering division, just retired last year. He extended a hand. Frank Morrison. Marcus shook it. Firm grip, no hesitation, none of the micro-tells that usually signaled discomfort when white people encountered successful black professionals. Marcus Wright. Wright Dynamics? Frank's eyebrows shot up. You're that Marcus Wright? The defense tech guy? That's me. Huh. Frank settled back in his seat, grinning. My grandson follows your company on LinkedIn. Says you're doing revolutionary work with autonomous systems. He paused. Though I gotta say, you don't look like the photos. More casual. I clean up when necessary. Marcus gestured at his hoodie. But life's too short to wear a suit on a plane. Amen to that. Frank pulled out a Tom Clancy novel, but he didn't open it. You heading to the Boeing campus? Strategic planning session. Potential partnership. Well, Frank's smile turned knowing. Don't let them intimidate you. Boeing folks think they invented aerospace. Half of them can barely use email. You walk in there with confidence, they'll respect that. It was good advice from someone who clearly understood the dynamics at play. Marcus filed it away, made a mental note to grab Frank's contact info after the flight. The kind of person who gave free wisdom to strangers at airport gates was exactly the kind of person you wanted in your network. Boarding began 15 minutes later. First-class passengers shuffled forward, a parade of privilege and entitlement. Marcus waited until the line thinned, then grabbed his backpack and joined the queue. The jet bridge smelled like jet fuel and recycled air. His footsteps echoed on the metal grating. Ahead, he could see the aircraft door, the warm light of the cabin, the flight attendant checking boarding passes with a smile that probably hurt her face after 8 hours of pretending to care. Lisa Hayes, 25 years old, new hire, still had that eager-to-please energy that 5 years of passenger abuse would eventually crush. She glanced at Marcus's boarding pass, and her smile didn't falter. Welcome aboard, Mr. Wright. Seat 1A right up front. Let me know if you need anything. Genuine warmth. No hesitation. No judgment. Marcus made a mental note to remember her name, to mention her in whatever feedback survey came after this flight. Then Rebecca Carlyle emerged from the galley. She was everything Lisa wasn't. 42 years of airline experience wrapped in a perfectly pressed uniform, hair shellacked into submission, smile sharp enough to cut glass. Her eyes tracked over Marcus the way a predator sizes up prey. Hoodie, backpack, skin, threat assessment complete in under 2 seconds. The smile never reached her eyes. Sir, I think there's been a mix-up. Economy is through that curtain. She pointed toward the back of the plane, voice dripping with the kind of false sweetness that always preceded violence. Marcus held up his boarding pass. The gold stripe caught the cabin light. Seat 1A, ma'am. Rebecca took the pass, scanned it with her handheld device, watched the screen flash VIP Omega level. Something flickered across her face. Surprise, maybe, or anger that the system had failed to validate her assumptions. "I see. And you're traveling alone today?" "Yes, ma'am. Business trip." She pulled out an iPad, made a show of scrolling through what was supposedly policy documentation. "Our first-class cabin has dress code requirements. Section 4.2b specifies business-appropriate attire. Athletic wear," she gestured at his hoodie like it was a personal insult, "isn't permitted." Frank Morrison, already seated in 1B, looked up from his Clancy novel. "Excuse me, miss. The gentleman has a valid boarding pass. What's the issue?" Rebecca's smile tightened, became even more artificial. "Sir, cabin standards are crew discretion under FAA Regulation 121.580. I'm sure you understand." It was a lie. FAA 121.580 dealt with emergency equipment requirements, had nothing to do with passenger dress codes. But she delivered it with such confident authority that most people would have believed her, would have backed down, would have accepted that maybe they'd misunderstood the rules. Marcus wasn't most people.
He kept his voice calm, professional, exactly the tone he used in boardrooms when someone tried to challenge his authority. "Ma'am, there's no dress code listed in the ticket terms and conditions I agreed to when I purchased this seat. I'd like to sit down now." Rebecca stared at him for a long moment, calculation visible behind her eyes. Frank was watching. Other first-class passengers were starting to board, would witness whatever happened next. Making a scene would reflect poorly on her, might trigger the kind of customer service complaint that actually got reviewed by management. She stepped aside, barely. Just enough space for Marcus to squeeze past, his backpack brushing against her perfectly pressed jacket. "Fine. But we have strict policies regarding noise levels, movement, and disruptions. No loud music, no excessive activity, no disturbances of any kind. Am I clear?" Crystal. Marcus slid into 1A, a throne of beige leather and false comfort. The seat was wide enough for 2 people, equipped with a lie-flat bed mechanism, a personal entertainment screen, a side table that could hold a laptop and a drink. Luxury at 30,000 feet. The kind of space that cost $8,000 for a cross-country flight. He owned this seat, owned this plane, owned the company whose logo was embroidered on the headrest 6 inches from his face. And Rebecca Carlyle was treating him like a criminal who'd snuck into first class through a service door. Marcus pulled out his laptop, opened the Boeing presentation, tried to focus. But Rebecca's presence loomed 3 feet away, a constant pressure, watching him like he might steal the silverware. Every few minutes she'd walk past his seat, make some small adjustment to the overhead bins or the curtain between first class and business, always managing to position herself where she could observe him. The plane filled slowly, business travelers and families and couples on vacation, all of them settling into their assigned seats, storing luggage, arguing with the overhead compartments. Normal people doing normal things, completely unaware that the man in 1A could buy and sell most of them without checking his account balance. Frank Morrison leaned over from 1B, voice low. "She's got it out for you. I've flown this route a dozen times. Never seen her act like this." "I've noticed." Marcus closed his laptop. "But I've dealt with worse." "I'm sure you have." Frank's expression turned sympathetic. "For what it's worth, I think you're handling it with more grace than I would." Grace. Sarah's favorite word. She'd had opinions about grace, about dignity, about responding to hatred with something other than matching hatred. "Grace isn't weakness," she'd told him once, maybe 2 months before the end. "It's the hardest strength there is." The flight attendant announcements began, safety procedures, exit rows, electronic devices. Marcus half listened, attention split between the presentation on his screen and the growing certainty that this flight was going to be a problem. He could feel it, the way you feel weather changing, some barometric shift in the pressure of human interaction. The plane pushed back from the gate at 9:14, 1 minute behind schedule. The engines roared to life, that deep mechanical thunder that always made Marcus think of Sarah's last words. "Don't let them make you small. You're too big for that." Takeoff was smooth. The ground dropped away, replaced by sky and clouds, and the geometric patterns of New York spreading below them like circuit boards. Marcus had flown this route maybe 50 times, knew every mile of it.
JFK to Seattle. 5 hours of compressed time, the country sliding past underneath, while you existed in a metal tube that defied physics through nothing more than velocity and faith. The seatbelt sign dinged off. Rebecca emerged from the galley with a drink cart, smile fixed in place like rigor mortis. She stopped at Frank's seat first. "Mr. Morrison, wonderful to see you again. Can I get you something to drink?" "Just orange juice today, Rebecca. Thank you." The warmth in her voice was genuine, earned through repeated interactions, the kind of customer relationship that airlines pretended to value until someone in a hoodie threatened to disrupt the carefully maintained hierarchy of who deserved respect. Rebecca turned to Marcus. The warmth evaporated. "And for you?" "Orange juice, please." She paused. Actually paused, like she was considering whether he deserved basic beverage service. "I'm sorry. Fresh squeezed juice is for full-fare adult passengers. I can offer you apple juice from economy if you'd like." The lie was so blatant, so unnecessary, that Marcus almost laughed. Full-fare adult passengers. As if his ticket, $8,400, charged to a corporate card with no limit, somehow didn't qualify. As if adult needed the modifier full fare to separate the real people from whatever category she'd assigned him to. Frank Morrison's face flushed red. "That's ridiculous. The man paid for first class. Give him orange juice." Rebecca's smile never wavered. "Mr. Morrison, our inventory is limited for this flight. I'm simply following—" "Give him my orange juice." Frank pushed his own cup across the armrest. "I'll have water." The gesture was small, but impossibly kind, the sort of human decency that shouldn't have been necessary, but somehow was. Rebecca's jaw tightened, but she couldn't refuse without making an even bigger scene. She poured orange juice with violent precision, liquid splashing over the rim, and slammed the cup onto Marcus's tray table. "There. Anything else, sir?" The words dripped sarcasm. "No, thank you." Marcus sipped the juice. It was good. Fresh squeezed, probably cost the airline $3 a glass. Worth fighting for, apparently. Worth humiliating a passenger over. Rebecca moved down the aisle, her professional mask perfectly restored, chatting with other passengers like nothing had happened. Like she hadn't just lied to a paying customer about something as basic as orange juice. Like this was all completely normal. Marcus pulled up his messages, typed a quick note to Tyrese. "Having issues with crew on flight 447. Document everything." Then he switched to his family tracker app, checked Daniel's location. Home. Safe. Mrs. Patterson had probably gotten him to school on time. The kid would be in pre-algebra right now, bored out of his mind, counting down until coding club. The thought of Daniel, his face when he concentrated on a difficult problem, the way he bit his lower lip exactly like Sarah used to, made Marcus's chest tight. Whatever happened in the next few hours, whatever this flight turned into, he needed to get home. Needed to be there for the Python homework, for the bedtime questions about whether black holes could ever touch, for all the small moments that added up to a childhood. An hour into the flight, Marcus unbuckled and stood. His back hurt from sitting, from the tension of being constantly observed. The forward lavatory sign glowed green, vacant. He took one step toward it. Rebecca materialized like she'd been waiting for this exact moment. "Sir, the forward lavatory is being serviced. You'll need to use the one in economy, past row 38. Marcus pointed at the sign. Green. Vacant. Physically impossible to be in service with that status showing. It says vacant. "The sensor is broken." She crossed her arms, blocking the narrow aisle with her body. "Company policy requires first-class passengers to use economy facilities when forward lavatories are under maintenance." Another lie, easily disprovable. But the alternative was physical confrontation, pushing past her, making contact, giving her exactly the excuse she seemed to be hunting for. Marcus turned around, walked the entire length of the aircraft, through business class with its semi-reclined seats, through premium economy with its extra 3 inches of legroom, through economy proper where families juggled crying babies and people tried to sleep with their knees pressed against the seats in front of them. 50 rows, 120 seconds of walking, while every passenger he passed registered his presence, his hoodie, his skin, the incongruity of someone from first class slumming in their territory. The economy lavatory was cramped and smelled like chemical flowers trying to mask human waste. Marcus did his business, washed his hands, stared at his own reflection in the mirror. 42 years old. Face showing the wear of 3 years of single parenting, of building an empire while grieving a wife. Eyes that Sarah used to call kind before the cancer made her too weak to say much of anything. He looked tired. Looked exactly like what he was, a man trying to hold it together through sheer force of will. The walk back took even longer. Economy passengers stared openly now, trying to figure out why the guy in first class was using their bathroom. A kid in 32B pointed. His mother shushed him. A teenager in 28C took a photo, probably already uploading it to TikTok with some caption about inequality or privilege or whatever narrative would get the most likes. Marcus made it back to first class after 12 minutes total, long enough that Frank Morrison looked concerned. "You okay? Thought you got lost back there." Bathroom was occupied. The lie came easily. No point explaining. No point dragging Frank into whatever power game Rebecca was playing. But Rebecca wasn't done. Marcus had barely sat down, barely rebuckled his seatbelt, when the cabin lights flared to full brightness. Emergency illumination, the kind that made everyone look corpse pale and terrified. Veronica Ashford stood in the aisle of row 2A, one hand clutching her chest like she was auditioning for a soap opera, face arranged in theatrical distress. "My bracelet!" Her voice carried through the entire first-class cabin, probably audible in business class too. "My $35,000 Cartier bracelet is missing!" Rebecca materialized at Veronica's seat within seconds, movements practiced from 15 years of performing concern for passengers whose problems usually involved champagne temperature or insufficient legroom. "Mrs. Ashford, when did you last see it?" Veronica's hands fluttered near her throat, fingers bare except for a wedding band that probably cost more than most people's cars. "I took it off 30 minutes ago to sleep. Put it right here on my tray table." She gestured at the polished surface, now empty except for a water glass and crumpled napkin. "When I woke up, it was gone." "Did you check the floor? Your carry-on?" Rebecca's voice carried the forced patience of someone who'd found countless missing items in seat pockets and overhead bins, but her eyes were already scanning the cabin, looking for a different kind of answer. "I checked everywhere." Veronica's volume increased, ensuring maximum audience participation. "Someone stole it." The man in 4D, Thomas Brennan, according to the passenger manifest Marcus had reviewed before boarding, half stood from his seat, pointing like a witness identifying a suspect in a lineup. "That guy in the hoodie. He was walking around earlier. I saw him." All eyes turned to Marcus. The physics of accusation operated with perfect efficiency. Words became evidence, became truth, became the only narrative that mattered. He'd been walking through the cabin, therefore he was near Veronica, therefore he must have taken the bracelet. The logic was circular, airtight, required no actual proof because the conclusion had been written before the investigation began. Rebecca's expression shifted, something predatory sliding behind the professional mask. She'd been waiting for this. Maybe not this exact scenario, but some justification, some excuse to escalate from microaggression to open confrontation. "Sir." She moved to block Marcus's row, positioning herself between him and the aisle like a warden. "Mrs. Ashford's bracelet is missing. You were the only passenger moving through first class during the relevant time frame." Marcus stayed seated,
hands visible on the armrests, every movement telegraphed and deliberate. This was the moment that defined everything. Comply and look guilty, resist and confirm their worst assumptions. I went to the bathroom. You directed me to use the economy facilities. A convenient excuse to move through the cabin unsupervised. The accusation hung in the recycled air, so absurd it should have collapsed under its own weight. Unsupervised, as if Marcus needed supervision, as if walking to a bathroom required a chaperone. Frank Morrison's face had gone crimson, veins visible at his temples. "This is outrageous. The man went to the lavatory because you wouldn't let him use the forward one." "Now you're accusing him of theft?" Rebecca spun on him, professionalism evaporating. "Sir, if you continue to interfere with crew duties, I will have the captain declare you a disruptive passenger. Sit down." Frank opened his mouth, closed it, looked at Marcus with an expression that begged forgiveness. The apology in his eyes said everything. "I want to help, but I can't afford to get thrown off this flight. I have a life that can't survive that kind of disruption. I'm sorry, but you're on your own." Marcus gave him the smallest nod. "It's okay. I understand. You're not the enemy here." "Empty your pockets." Rebecca's voice carried through the cabin, performance art disguised as security. Every passenger in first class was watching now, phones probably recording, creating a permanent digital record of this moment. Marcus stood slowly, movements careful and controlled. The alternative was worse. Refuse and give them justification for force, for calling in air marshals or diverting the flight. He pulled items from his hoodie pocket one by one, placing them on his tray table like evidence at a crime scene. iPhone 15 Pro, black. Screen cracked slightly in the upper right corner from where Daniel had dropped it last month while trying to photograph a rare beetle. Wallet. Leather, worn soft from 5 years of daily use. The ID window showed his Amex Centurion card, that black rectangle that supposedly separated the ultra-wealthy from regular rich people. An arbitrary status symbol for an arbitrary system. AirPods case, white. One earbud had been slowly dying for weeks, cutting out during phone calls, but Marcus hadn't replaced them because Sarah had given him this pair for his 40th birthday. Boarding pass, already crumpled despite being printed less than 3 hours ago. Protein bar, chocolate peanut butter, partially melted. No bracelet, no jewelry of any kind. Nothing remotely resembling $35,000 worth of Cartier diamonds. Rebecca stared at the collection like it had personally offended her. "Your bag. Open it." Marcus lifted his North Face backpack onto the seat, unzipped it fully, spread it wide. The contents were painfully mundane. Laptop in a protective sleeve, charging cables wrapped with Velcro ties, one change of clothes still in a plastic laundry bag from his last trip, deodorant, a paperback copy of Thinking Fast and Slow that he'd been trying to finish for 6 months. Rebecca rifled through it anyway, hands invasive and rough, pulling out the clothes and shaking them, checking every pocket and fold. Her fingers found nothing because there was nothing to find. The bracelet existed in some quantum state of Veronica's imagination, simultaneously on her tray table 30 minutes ago, and now nowhere, with Marcus as the only possible explanation for its transition between states. He hid it somewhere. Rebecca's certainty never wavered. These people know how to conceal stolen goods. These people. The phrase landed like a slap, echoing through the cabin with perfect clarity. Marcus felt something cold and ancient settle in his chest, the same feeling his grandfather must have experienced at lunch counters in Birmingham. The same rage his father had swallowed, working twice as hard for half the recognition. The performance never changed, only the stage was different. Which people would that be? Marcus kept his voice level, each word precisely measured. "Please clarify." Rebecca's face flickered, realization that she'd said the quiet part loud, that phones were recording, that this moment would follow her if she didn't backtrack immediately. "I meant, suspicious passengers. Individuals who don't follow normal protocols. Normal. Marcus let the word hang. Define normal. Sir, don't make this more difficult than it needs to be.
Rebecca grabbed the interphone from its wall mount, pressed a button for the cockpit. Captain Morrison, we have a Code 3 security situation. Suspected theft and passenger becoming confrontational. I don't feel safe. Request immediate diversion. The cabin erupted. Passengers who'd been pretending not to watch suddenly had opinions, loud and immediate. A woman in 3C started shouting about missing her connection. The man in 5A demanded to know why they were being diverted for some thief. Someone near the back actually applauded, as if Rebecca had just captured a dangerous criminal instead of humiliating a paying customer. Veronica stood, pointing at Marcus with a finger heavy with rings. That man stole my bracelet! He's a thief! I want him arrested when we land! Captain Timothy Morrison's voice crackled through the PA system, calm and authoritative in the way that only pilots could manage.
Ladies and gentlemen, due to a security incident, we are diverting to Billings, Montana. We will be on the ground in approximately 35 minutes. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened. We apologize for the inconvenience. 35 minutes. Half an hour for this situation to solidify into official record, for Marcus to transform from passenger to suspect, for the story to calcify around him like concrete. He thought about Daniel, probably in 5th period right now, science class or history, completely unaware that his father was being treated like a criminal at 30,000 feet. Thought about the Boeing presentation he'd never give, the merger that would collapse without him there to sell it, the $8 billion evaporating because Rebecca Carlyle couldn't imagine a black man in a hoodie belonging in first class. Frank Morrison leaned close, voice barely a whisper. Don't say anything else. Not one word. When we land, ask for a lawyer immediately. Good advice from someone who understood how systems worked, how quickly innocent people could be ground up by bureaucracy and assumption. But Marcus had resources Frank couldn't imagine, tools that were already activating, a security apparatus that had been waiting for exactly this scenario. Rebecca returned from the cockpit carrying something that made Marcus's stomach drop. Heavy-duty flex cuffs, the industrial zip ties that police and security forces used for mass arrests. Black plastic rated for over 300 pounds of tensile strength. Unbreakable without tools, humiliating by design. Sir, for the safety of the flight and in accordance with FAA regulations, I need to restrain you until we land. The regulation she was citing didn't exist. Marcus knew FAA guidelines better than most pilots, had studied them obsessively after Sarah's death, paranoid about aircraft safety, about the million things that could go wrong at altitude. Nothing in federal law authorized flight attendants to restrain passengers based solely on accusation. This was improvisation, Rebecca making up rules as she went, confident that her authority would go unquestioned. You're violating my civil rights. Marcus kept his hands visible on the armrests, made no move toward her. I haven't threatened anyone. I haven't committed any crime. You have no legal authority to restrain me without probable cause. I have probable cause. A passenger reported theft, and you are the only person in position to commit it. An accusation is not evidence. This is false imprisonment. Rebecca's smile turned cruel. Resist, and I'll add interference with a flight crew to the charges. Checkmate. Resist and confirm every stereotype about violent black men. Comply and accept the role of criminal she'd written for him. Either choice led to the same destination. Handcuffs, police, arrest record, the permanent stain that would follow him regardless of eventual exoneration. Marcus thought about fighting, about refusing, about making them drag him from his seat, about forcing this confrontation to its logical conclusion. But Daniel's face appeared in his mind. 12 years old, already processing the world's racism with a sophistication no child should need. And Marcus knew what his son would see if this escalated. Would see his father arrested, would watch it on TMZ or Twitter or TikTok, would have to defend his dad in school while other kids' parents whispered about the black CEO who got caught stealing. So Marcus extended his wrists. The cold calculation in the gesture was deliberate. Comply now. Document everything. Let them think they'd won. Then deploy resources they couldn't imagine. Consequences they hadn't considered. A response calibrated to destroy careers and reputations with the same efficiency they'd tried to destroy his. Rebecca zip-tied his wrists together, pulling the plastic tight enough to bite into skin. Marcus felt the sharp edge cut through the first layer, felt warmth that was probably blood, kept his face completely neutral. The pain was temporary. The video evidence of her doing this, recorded by at least 3 phones he could see, probably more, would be permanent. She leaned close as she finished, her breath hot against his ear. You picked the wrong flight. You thought you could steal from rich people and get away with it? Montana police will handle you. Not the police. Montana police. The specification was telling. Some assumption about rural law enforcement, about jurisdictions where certain behaviors might be overlooked, where someone like Marcus would face a less sympathetic audience. The geography of justice. Marcus looked her directly in the eyes, let 3 full seconds of silence stretch between them. You have no idea who you're dealing with. She laughed. Actually laughed, the sound high and sharp and certain. Save it for the cops. Rebecca walked away, victorious, probably imagining the commendation she'd receive for stopping a thief, for protecting first-class passengers from dangerous criminals, for doing her job with such dedication. She had no idea what she'd just triggered, no concept of the machinery now grinding into motion, of the forces she'd set against herself through sheer ignorance and prejudice. Marcus's bound hands found the satellite phone in his hoodie's kangaroo pocket. The Garmin InReach Mini sat exactly where he'd left it, a device most people thought was for hikers and backcountry enthusiasts, for people who needed emergency communication beyond cellular range. They weren't wrong, but Right Dynamics had modified this particular unit, had integrated it into the company's global security network, had turned a $300 GPS beacon into a trigger for responses that cost millions to maintain. One red button. Press and hold for 3 seconds. That was all it took. Marcus pressed. The screen lit up blue and silent. Code black activated. No sound, no alert, just confirmation that somewhere in Langley, Virginia, a security operations center had just received his GPS coordinates, his biometric data from the Apple Watch on his wrist, and threat assessment algorithms that were already calculating response protocols. Rebecca snatched the phone from his hands, stared at the screen like it was written in a language she couldn't parse. What is this? Who did you call? Nobody. The truth was simpler than she could understand. It's automatic. Automatic what? My security team now knows exactly where I am, what happened, and who did it. Marcus settled back into his seat, wrists screaming where the plastic cut deeper with each movement. They're very efficient. Rebecca threw the phone into the galley trash, probably imagining she'd eliminated some kind of evidence, some tool Marcus might use against her. She had no idea that the beacon had already transmitted everything it needed to, that the phone itself was now irrelevant, that 3,000 miles away, a team of ex-military operators were already mobilizing resources that would make her life incomprehensibly difficult. The plane began its descent, that stomach-dropping sensation of altitude surrendering to gravity. Through the window, Montana sprawled below them, mountains and plains, and the kind of endless space that made humans feel appropriately small. Billings emerged from the landscape, a city of 100,000 people who were about to have a very unusual morning. Marcus closed his eyes, thought about Sarah, about the promise he'd made at her deathbed, the one about never letting money change him, about staying true to whatever essential self existed beneath the wealth and power. She'd worry he was breaking that promise now, deploying the full weight of his resources against people who were just doing their jobs, just following the scripts society had written for them. But Sarah had also taught him about dignity, about the difference between grace and submission, between choosing peace and accepting abuse. "Don't let them make you small," she'd said. "You're too big for that." Marcus wasn't small, wasn't going to be made small. And the people who'd tried were about to discover exactly how big he actually was. 400 miles north, in a secure facility beneath Wright Dynamics' Langley campus, Tyrese Jackson stared at screens that had just transformed from routine monitoring to active crisis. The main display showed Marcus's location, a blinking red dot over Montana, altitude descending, velocity indicating approach for landing. Biometric data scrolled in a sidebar, heart rate elevated but controlled at 98 beats per minute, cortisol levels spiking to nearly 300% above baseline, movement restricted in ways that suggested physical restraint. The Apple Watch camera had captured the last 60 seconds before Rebecca confiscated the phone. Tyrese had already watched the footage 3 times, each viewing making his jaw clench tighter. Flex cuffs. On his boss. On the CEO of a company that employed 14,000 people and had contracts with the Department of Defense worth $9 billion. On a man who'd never committed a crime more serious than parking tickets. "Get me Jennifer Park." Tyrese's voice cut through the operations center's ambient noise, through the low hum of servers and cooling systems and analysts monitoring global security feeds. "And activate Protocol Archangel. Full deployment." The junior operator at Station 3 looked up, young enough that his hands shook slightly as he reached for his keyboard. "Sir, Archangel is for imminent threat to Principal's life. Shouldn't we verify?" "The boss is zip-tied on a commercial aircraft based on false accusations. That's kidnapping. That's a threat." Tyrese pulled up the passenger manifest for Flight 447, started running background checks on every name. "I want Razor Team Alpha airborne in 8 minutes. Bravo on the ground in Billings in 40. Legal team drafting federal injunctions in 5. And someone find me everything about Rebecca Carlisle and Gary Hendricks. Employment history, social media, parking tickets, everything." Screens around the room erupted with activity. Operators who'd been monitoring routine feeds switched to crisis protocols, fingers flying across keyboards, phones pressed to ears, the machinery of corporate security shifting from observation to action with the smooth efficiency of long practice. Jennifer Park appeared on the video screen mounted above the main display, her face showing the kind of controlled panic that came from years of managing emergencies. "Tyrese, what's happening? The system flagged code black, but I'm not seeing threat indicators." "Threat is human, not environmental. Boss was racially profiled at JFK, harassed by crew, accused of theft, and is now physically restrained. They're diverting to Billings." Jennifer's expression went from concerned to furious in the space between heartbeats. "They put handcuffs on Marcus Wright." "Zip ties, but yes." "Jesus Christ." She disappeared from frame for a moment, came back wearing a jacket. "I'm heading to the office. Initiate Archangel. And Tyrese, I want names. I want employment contracts. I want to know who at Royal Meridian authorized this, and I want their termination paperwork ready before that plane touches down." "Already on it." Tyrese switched feeds, pulled up the shell company structure that gave Wright Dynamics control of Royal Meridian Airways. 54% ownership buried under layers of LLCs and holding companies invisible to everyone except the lawyers who'd structured it. Anonymous for 3 years, about to become very, very public. Boss is going to burn that airline to the ground. "Good." Jennifer's smile had no warmth in it. "They've earned it." The call ended. Tyrese turned to his team, felt the adrenaline of crisis management flooding his system, the same chemical rush he'd gotten running operations in Kandahar before Wright Dynamics had recruited him. "Status on Razor teams."
Alphas wheels up in 6 minutes from Malmstrom Air Force Base. 2 Black Hawks, 8 operators.
ETA to Billings is 14 minutes. The analyst at Station 1 read from her screen without looking up. Bravo is loading into vehicles now. Ground convoy, 6 Bearcats, 12 operators. ETA 38 minutes assuming traffic cooperation. Make traffic cooperate. Tyrese pulled up the Billings airport layout, started identifying approach vectors and security vulnerabilities. And get me the tower frequency. I want direct communication with air traffic control before that plane lands. Sir. Station 3 again, the kid who'd questioned Archangel Protocol. The media is going to notice military helicopters and armored vehicles surrounding a commercial flight. This is going to be news. That's the point. Tyrese zoomed in on the aircraft icon, watched it drop through 20,000 feet. 17, 15. Boss wants everyone to see exactly what happens when you treat him like a criminal. We're not hiding this. We're advertising it. In Manhattan, Marcus's penthouse sat empty, except for Daniel and Mrs. Patterson, the elderly woman who'd been helping with childcare since Sarah's death. Daniel sprawled across the living room floor, laptop open to a coding tutorial, earbuds playing lo-fi hip-hop that helped him concentrate. 12 years old and already thinking like an engineer, breaking complex problems into manageable components, debugging with the kind of patience most adults never developed. His iPad buzzed. Family tracking app. The notification made his stomach drop before he even read it. Dad, emergency alert. Billings, Montana. Daniel ripped out his earbuds. Mrs. Patterson! She emerged from the kitchen, dish towel in hand, concern already creasing her face. What's wrong? Dad's emergency alert just went off. It says he's in Montana. Daniel's fingers flew across the iPad screen, pulling up details. GPS coordinates, timestamp. No additional information. He was supposed to be in Seattle. Why is he in Montana? Mrs. Patterson pulled out her phone, dialed Marcus's number. It went straight to voicemail. She tried again. Same result. Honey, I'm sure he's fine. Sometimes those alerts are just... No. Daniel was already dialing Tyrese's direct line, the number his dad had made him memorize for emergencies. They're not glitches. Dad made me practice this. If the alert goes off, call Tyrese immediately. The line connected on the second ring. Tyrese's voice came through tight and controlled, professional in the way adults got when they were lying to protect you. Daniel, I was about to call you. Where's my dad? The app says emergency in Montana. Is he hurt? Silence stretched for 3 seconds too long, which was answer enough. Daniel felt his chest constrict, felt the same crushing fear he had experienced sitting in hospital waiting rooms while his mom died by inches. Tyrese, tell me the truth. What happened? Your dad is not injured, but there's a situation on his flight. Tyrese's voice softened slightly. Some people made a very bad decision. They're treating him unfairly. How unfairly? Another pause. Tyrese was choosing words carefully, trying to find the balance between honesty and protection, between treating Daniel like a kid and respecting his intelligence. They accused him of something he didn't do. They put restraints on him. The world tilted. Daniel's vision narrowed, everything going distant and small. They handcuffed my dad? Yes. But Daniel, listen to me. Your father activated Code Black. Right now, I have 30 operators heading to that plane. By the time they land, your dad will be free, and the people who did this will face consequences. I promise you. Can I talk to him? Not yet. The crew took his phone. But soon. Very soon. Tyrese's tone shifted, became the voice Daniel recognized from the times he'd visited the operations center, watched the security team run drills. Your dad is a fighter. He's smart, and he's prepared, and he's going to be fine. You believe me? Daniel wanted to trust that Tyrese could fix this, that his dad's money and power would somehow overcome whatever racism had put him in handcuffs. But he'd seen the videos on TikTok, read the news stories,
knew that being right didn't always matter when you were black in America. "Just keep him safe, please." "I will. I promise." The call ended. Daniel sat on the hardwood floor, iPad dark in his lap, trying to process information his brain didn't want to accept. His dad, Marcus Wright, CEO, billionaire, the smartest person Daniel knew, was being treated like a criminal. Because of what? A hoodie? His skin? The fundamental fact of existing while black in a space white people had decided belonged to them. Mrs. Patterson sat down beside him, put an arm around his shoulders. She didn't say anything, just sat there, present and solid, while Daniel tried not to cry. The Boeing 777 touched down on Billings Logan International's runway at exactly 10:43 Mountain Time, wheels hitting asphalt with the controlled violence of 200,000 pounds surrendering to gravity. The landing was smooth. Captain Morrison knew his job, whatever else could be said about his judgment. The aircraft rolled to a stop at a remote parking area, far from the terminal, the kind of isolation usually reserved for mechanical emergencies or security threats. Through the window, Marcus could see 2 police cruisers waiting. Standard response for a diverted flight. What wasn't standard was the sky. 4 Black Hawk helicopters dropped out of the clouds like mechanical angels, rotors thundering, downwash kicking up storms of snow and dirt. They circled the aircraft at 500 feet, a choreographed show of force that made every passenger in the cabin press against windows, phones out, recording what had suddenly become the most interesting thing to happen in Billings in decades. At the same moment, 8 armored Bearcat vehicles crashed through the airport's perimeter fence, tore through chain link like it was tissue paper, sirens blaring, lights strobing blue and red and white. They formed a perimeter around the 777, blocking every exit, every escape route. 30 operators in black tactical gear pouring out with rifles held at low ready. The cabin erupted. Passengers screamed. Someone shouted about terrorists. A child started crying, high and terrified, the sound cutting through the chaos like a knife. Rebecca Carlyle stood frozen in the aisle, face drained of color, staring out the window at a response she couldn't possibly comprehend. "What? Who are those people?" Marcus stayed seated, wrists still bound, blood now trickling down to stain his joggers. His voice came out perfectly calm. "I told you. You have no idea who you're dealing with." The lead Bearcat's door swung open, and Tyrese Jackson stepped onto Montana asphalt like a force of nature given human form. 6'4", bald head gleaming under harsh winter sun, a scar cutting from his left eyebrow to his cheekbone, souvenir from Fallujah that he wore like a medal. His tactical vest carried no weapons visible from the cabin, but the way he moved suggested he didn't need any. 20 operators formed up behind him, a wall of black uniforms and controlled aggression. Tyrese grabbed a megaphone from one of his team, raised it to his lips. His voice boomed across the tarmac, loud enough to rattle the 777's windows. "Royal Meridian Flight 447. This is Wright Dynamics Security operating under federal authority. You are under investigation for civil rights violations and unlawful restraint of a minor." He paused, checked something on a tablet one of his operators handed him. "Correction. Unlawful restraint of Marcus Alexander Wright, CEO of Wright Dynamics. Nobody leaves this aircraft until cleared by our legal team." Inside the cabin, chaos metastasized into full panic. A woman in 6A started hyperventilating into an air sickness bag. The man who'd been so confident pointing at Marcus earlier now had his face pressed against the window, skin the color of old milk. Children cried. Adults shouted questions nobody could answer. The carefully maintained illusion of order that made commercial aviation possible had shattered, replaced by raw animal fear. Rebecca Carlyle stood in the galley, one hand gripping the counter to keep herself upright, the other pressed against her mouth like she might vomit. Her perfectly maintained professional mask had cracked down the middle, revealing something underneath that looked like terror. The aircraft door remained sealed. Through the cockpit windshield, Captain Morrison could be seen on the radio, gesturing frantically, probably arguing with the tower, with Billings police, with anyone who might explain why military helicopters and armored vehicles had just turned his aircraft into a crime scene. Two Billings police officers approached the stairs, Dale Kowalski and Amy Reeves, both looking severely underprepared for whatever was happening. Kowalski had his hand near his service weapon but hadn't drawn it yet, some remaining thread of professional judgment telling him that pulling a gun on people with assault rifles would end poorly. Tyrese met them halfway up the mobile stairs, blocking their path with nothing more than physical presence. "Officers, I need you to stop right there." Kowalski's face flushed red. "Who the hell are you people? This is our jurisdiction. You can't." "Executive protection, right dynamics." Tyrese produced credentials, a federal contractor badge that made Kowalski's eyes widen. "We have authority under Title 18, Section 242 of the United States Code. Civil rights violations and deprivation of rights under color of law." "Under whose authorization?" Kowalski was trying to maintain some grip on procedure, on the rules that normally governed how these things worked. "I need to see a warrant, a court order, something." Tyrese handed him a tablet. The screen showed a federal injunction signed by Judge Patricia Moreno of the District of Montana, time-stamped 14 minutes ago. Kowalski read it twice, lips moving silently, trying to find some loophole or error that would let him reclaim jurisdiction. He found nothing. "This is about a theft accusation." Reeves stepped forward, younger and apparently braver than her partner. "Someone reported a stolen bracelet. That's not a federal case. That's local PD. It stopped being about theft the moment your crew put restraints on my principal without probable cause." Tyrese's voice carried the kind of calm that preceded violence. "That's kidnapping. That's false imprisonment. That's assault. Would you like me to continue?" Kowalski handed the tablet back, shoulders sagging in defeat. "What do you want us to do?" "Stand aside. Let my team board. We'll handle this." The officers retreated to the bottom of the stairs, radios crackling with traffic from dispatch, from supervisors, from a chain of command that was probably screaming questions nobody could answer. Tyrese gestured to his team. 4 operators followed him into the aircraft. The cabin fell silent the moment Tyrese's boots hit the threshold. 200 people holding their collective breath, watching this man who moved like controlled thunder scan the first-class section with eyes that cataloged everything: the passengers, the crew, the body language, the fear. His gaze locked onto Marcus. Bound wrists, blood-staining gray fabric, face showing nothing, revealing nothing. The same expression Tyrese had seen on the boss during budget negotiations and hostile takeovers, and the day they'd buried Sarah. Marcus didn't do panic, didn't do surrender, just calculated the angles and waited for his moment. Tyrese crossed the cabin in 4 strides, knelt beside 1A, pulled a combat knife from his vest. The blade was black, serrated on one edge, the kind of tool that had killed people in worse places than Montana. He slipped it carefully between Marcus's wrists and the flex cuff, cut through industrial plastic like butter. The restraints fell away. Marcus's hands came forward, wrists raw and bleeding where the plastic had sawed through skin. Deep gouges, purple bruising already forming, the kind of injury that would leave scars. Tyrese examined them with the clinical efficiency of someone who'd performed field medicine in combat zones, checking for nerve damage, for broken blood vessels, for anything that needed immediate treatment. "Boss, you okay?" Marcus flexed his fingers, testing range of motion. Everything worked, more or less. "I'm fine, Tyrese. Just get me off this plane." "In a minute." Tyrese stood, turned to face Rebecca Carlyle. His expression shifted from concern to something glacial and merciless. "Ma'am, who authorized the use of restraints on this passenger?" Rebecca's voice came out strangled, barely audible. I did. He was accused of theft. I was following protocol." "Show me the protocol." Tyrese's hand extended, palm up, waiting.
FAA regulation. Company policy.
Anything that says you can restrain a passenger based solely on accusation. Silence. Rebecca's mouth opened, closed, opened again. No words came out because there were no words that could defend what she'd done. That's what I thought. Tyrese gestured to Kowalski, who'd followed them aboard despite being told to wait. Officer, I need you to search passenger Veronica Ashford's belongings. The alleged stolen bracelet is in her bag. I guarantee it. Veronica shot to her feet, face mottled with rage and fear.
How dare you! I am the victim here! That man
is Marcus Wright, CEO of an $18 billion company, majority shareholder of the airline you're currently standing in. And you just committed fraud by filing a false police report. Tyrese didn't raise his voice. Didn't need to. Officer Kowalski, the bag. Now. Kowalski looked to Reeves, who shrugged. They were so far past normal procedure that following orders from whoever seemed most competent was probably the safest bet. The rookie officer approached Veronica's seat, grabbed her Hermes Birkin bag over her shouted protests. The search took 30 seconds. Reeves dumped the bag's contents onto the empty seat. Wallet, makeup compact, iPad, various credit cards scattered like confetti. She checked the main compartment, the side pockets, the hidden zipper that luxury bags always had for valuables. Her fingers found fabric, pulled, and out came a tennis bracelet that caught the cabin lights and threw rainbows across beige leather. Cartier. $35,000 of diamonds that had never been missing, had never been stolen, had existed in Veronica's bag the entire time. The cabin's collective gasp could have depressurized the aircraft. Every passenger who'd watched Marcus get accused, get bound, get humiliated, now stared at Veronica Ashford like she'd spontaneously transformed into something toxic. Reeves held up the bracelet, letting it dangle from her fingers. Ma'am, you want to explain this? Veronica's face cycled through emotions faster than a slot machine. Shock, fear, rage, calculation.
That's impossible. It wasn't there before. Someone must have put it back. He must have—
Stop!
Tyrese cut through her spiral with surgical precision. Officer Reeves, please note that Mrs. Ashford just admitted the bracelet is hers while simultaneously claiming it was stolen. That's contradictory testimony and probable cause for filing a false report. I didn't file anything! Veronica's voice rose to a shriek. I just told the crew it was missing. You demanded my principal be arrested. You called him a thief in front of 200 witnesses. Multiple passengers recorded you. Tyrese pulled out his phone, played a video one of his team had already pulled from social media. 60 seconds of Veronica pointing and shouting, her voice clear and damning. That's defamation. That's intentional infliction of emotional distress. That's enough for a civil suit that will take everything you own. Veronica collapsed back into her seat, the reality of consequences finally penetrating whatever privileged bubble she'd been living in. Her hands shook. Her makeup started to run, expensive mascara streaking down her cheeks in black rivers. Marcus stood slowly, rolling his shoulders, feeling circulation return to his hands in painful waves of pins and needles. He looked at Rebecca Carlyle, really looked at her, letting the silence stretch until she started to squirm. You put handcuffs on me. His voice stayed conversational, almost friendly, which made it more terrifying than shouting would have been. Not because I committed a crime. Not because I threatened anyone, but because you looked at my skin and my clothes and decided I was the kind of person who steals. Rebecca's mouth opened, but nothing came out. What could she say? What defense existed for the indefensible? Here's what's going to happen. Marcus stepped into the aisle, blocking her exit, forcing her to face him. I'm going to walk off this plane. Officer Kowalski is going to document my injuries. Tyrese's team is going to collect statements from every passenger who witnessed this. And then my lawyers are going to explain to you exactly what false imprisonment means. Sir, I didn't know. Rebecca's voice cracked halfway through. Didn't know what? That I'm rich? That I own this airline? Marcus shook his head. You didn't need to know any of that. You just needed to treat me like a human being. But you couldn't do that because of what I look like. The truth of it hung in the recycled air, undeniable and ugly. Jose had no response because Marcus was right, and everyone in the cabin knew it. Captain Morrison, Marcus raised his voice slightly, addressing the cockpit. You diverted this flight based on crew recommendation without verifying facts. You endangered 200 passengers because your purser has racial bias. Come out here and face what you've done. The cockpit door opened. Timothy Morrison emerged, looking like he'd aged 10 years in the last hour. Gray hair disheveled, uniform rumpled. He'd been flying commercial aircraft for 28 years, had logged over 15,000 hours, had never once had a serious safety incident. That record was about to end. Mr. Wright, I apologize for the confusion. If I'd known who you were— Stop! Marcus held up a hand, the one with dried blood on the wrist. If I weren't a billionaire CEO, would what happened to me be acceptable? If I were just a regular passenger in a hoodie, would false accusations and zip ties be fine? Morrison's silence was answer enough. You don't get to hide behind "if I'd known." Marcus's voice dropped, became something that would haunt Morrison's dreams. You revealed exactly who you are when you thought I was powerless. That's the truth you'll carry. Tyrese cleared his throat. Boss, we should get you to a hospital. Those wrists need proper treatment. In a minute. Marcus wasn't done. He turned to address the entire cabin, voice carrying to the back rows where economy passengers were pressed against the curtain, phones recording. My name is Marcus Alexander Wright. I'm the CEO of Wright Dynamics, an $18 billion defense technology company. 3 years ago, after my wife died, I invested in this airline, bought 54% through shell companies because I wanted reliable aircraft for business travel. Gasps rippled through the cabin. The revelation landed like a bomb. This man they'd watched get humiliated, get restrained, get treated like a criminal, owned the plane they were sitting in. Royal Meridian Airways no longer exists as of this moment. Marcus pulled his phone from his pocket. Tyrese must have retrieved it from the galley trash. Effective immediately, this is Wright Airways. And Captain Morrison, Purser Carlisle, you are both terminated for cause. Gross negligence, civil rights violations, and failure to maintain basic human decency. Rebecca made a sound somewhere between a sob and a scream. You can't fire me mid-flight. I have a pension. I have 15 years. Had. The correction was cold, final. You had a pension. You had a career. You gambled both on your assumption that I was a thief. You lost. Tyrese handed Marcus a printed document, official-looking, with legal letterhead. Marcus scanned it, nodded, then read aloud. By order of majority shareholder Marcus A. Wright, the following employees are terminated effective 10:47 Mountain Time. Captain Timothy Morrison. Purser Rebecca Carlisle. Termination for cause under Section 8.3 of Company Employment Contracts. All benefits forfeit. Aviation certifications flagged for FAA review. You are no longer authorized crew. Vacate this aircraft immediately. Morrison's face went from gray to white. You're leaving us in Montana? How are we supposed to get home? There's a Greyhound station downtown. I hear the afternoon bus to Denver has availability. Marcus gestured to Tyrese's team. Escort them off the aircraft. 2 operators moved forward, professional and efficient. Rebecca tried to grab her purse from the overhead bin, but one of the operators stopped her. Ma'am, your personal effects will be inventoried and shipped. You need to leave now. The walk down the aisle was the longest of Rebecca Carlisle's life. Every passenger she passed stared with a mixture of satisfaction and horror, watching her public destruction,
recording it for social media immortality. She was crying openly now, makeup completely destroyed, 15 years of perfect performance shattered in 2 hours. Morrison followed in silence, shell-shocked, probably still processing how his career had ended over a bracelet that was never stolen. At the aircraft door, Rebecca turned back one last time. Her voice came out desperate, pleading. "Mr. Wright, please. I made a mistake. I have bills. I have—" "You had compassion too once. You gave it up for the satisfaction of humiliating someone you thought was beneath you." Marcus met her eyes without mercy. "Now you get to experience what that feels like." The operators escorted them down the stairs. News helicopters had arrived, circling at a distance, cameras capturing every moment of the perp walk. Rebecca and Morrison stood on the tarmac in their uniforms, surrounded by tactical operators and police, while social media exploded with footage and speculation. Tyrese pulled up his phone, showed Marcus the trending topics. Hashtag Royal Meridian was #1 worldwide. Hashtag Marcus Wright was #3. The first videos had gone viral in minutes, passengers posting from the cabin, cell phone footage of the helicopters descending, Rebecca and Morrison being escorted off the plane, looking broken. "This is going to be national news in about 10 minutes. Tyrese scrolled through Twitter, watching the story metastasize in real time. CNN just sent a push notification. So did Fox. BBC is picking it up. Marcus nodded. Good. Let it go viral. Let everyone see what happened when you treated people like criminals based on assumptions. Let the whole world watch the consequences unfold. He turned to address the remaining passengers, most of whom were still recording. Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for what you just witnessed. You paid for reliable transportation and instead got a civil rights violation. That's unacceptable. Murmurs through the cabin, a mix of agreement and uncertainty. A woman in 4C raised her hand like she was in school. Are we going to Seattle? I have a connection. You're going wherever you need to go. Marcus gestured to Tyrese. My team is arranging alternative transportation for everyone who wants it. Additionally, every passenger on this flight will receive a full refund, a $5,000 travel voucher, and first-class status on Wright Airways for life. For those of you in first class who witness this directly, you'll receive an additional $25,000 in compensation. Stunned silence, then eruption. People were shouting thank yous, others were crying, some were applauding. The woman in 4C looked like she'd won the lottery. Frank Morrison stood up from 1B, extended his hand. Marcus shook it. The older man's grip was firm, his eyes wet. That took more strength than I've seen in 40 years. You did good, son. Your wife would be proud. The words hit harder than they should have, punching through Marcus's carefully maintained control. He swallowed against something tight in his throat. Thank you, Frank. That means more than you know. Tyrese's radio crackled. Boss, we have a situation. Daniel's on the line. He saw the news. Wants to talk to you. Marcus took the radio, stepped into the galley for minimal privacy. Daniel? You there? His son's voice came through shaky and small. Dad? Are you okay? CNN said you got arrested. I'm fine, buddy. Not arrested, just had some trouble with airline staff. But it's handled now. Did they really handcuff you? The question carried weight beyond its words, carrying every fear that came from being a black kid in America, from knowing your father could do everything right and still end up dead or imprisoned. Marcus looked at his wrists, at the blood dried black against his skin. Yeah, they did. But I'm okay, and the people who did it learned a very expensive lesson. Are you coming home? Soon. I have to finish some things here, but Daniel, I need you to understand something. Marcus paused, choosing words carefully. What happened today wasn't about anything I did wrong.
It was about people making assumptions. And when people make assumptions about you because of how you look, you don't accept it. You fight back, not with fists, but with truth and consequences. You understand? Silence for a few seconds. Then Daniel's voice came back stronger. I understand. But Dad, can you fight back from home next time? I don't like seeing you hurt. Deal. Marcus smiled despite everything. I'll be back tonight. We'll order pizza, and you can tell me about school. Okay. Love you, Dad. Love you too, son. The call ended. Marcus stood in the galley for a moment, forehead pressed against the cool metal of the bulkhead, letting himself feel the exhaustion and anger and relief that had been building for hours. Then he straightened, squared his shoulders, and walked back into the cabin. Tyrese was coordinating with Billings Police, with the tower, with his own team. He looked up as Marcus approached. Medical team wants to check you out before we fly you to Seattle. Just precautionary. Fine. But Tyrese, I want everything. I want employment records on Gary Hendricks and Rebecca Carlisle. I want their social media history. I want to know every complaint filed against them, every passenger they've mistreated, every time they've gotten away with this. Already pulling it, Tyrese showed him a tablet displaying Rebecca's personnel file. She's got 3 complaints in her record. 2 for inappropriate passenger interaction, 1 for failure to maintain service standards. All dismissed by management with warnings. Not anymore. Marcus scrolled through the file, seeing the pattern. They knew she had problems. They ignored it. That's institutional liability. His phone rang. The caller ID showed Jennifer Park, his COO. Marcus answered. Jen? Marcus, are you hurt? I'm watching CNN and they're showing footage of you in handcuffs. Zip ties. And I'm fine. Angry, but fine. Jennifer's voice shifted from concerned to businesslike. I've activated the legal team. They're drafting civil suits against every person involved. Personal liability suits, not just corporate. We're going after their houses, their pensions, everything. Good. What about Royal Meridian's board? Emergency meeting scheduled for tonight. They don't know yet that you're the majority shareholder. That's going to be a fun conversation. Jennifer's smile was audible. Also, the stock is in free fall, down 28% in the last hour. Investors are panicking. Let them panic. Marcus watched through the window as more news vans arrived as the circus grew. Tomorrow morning, announce a $2 billion capital injection. New name, new branding, new policies. Zero tolerance for discrimination. We're rebuilding this airline from the ground up. The market will love that. We'll probably end up higher than we started. I don't care about the market. I care about making sure this never happens to anyone else. Marcus felt the weight of his own words, the responsibility they carried. How many passengers fly Royal Meridian every year? About 45 million. Then 45 million people are going to fly an airline that treats them like human beings, no matter what they look like, no matter what they're wearing. That's the standard. Jennifer was quiet for a moment. When she spoke again, her voice had softened. Sarah would be proud of you. For the second time in 10 minutes, someone invoked his dead wife's opinion. Maybe they were right. Maybe Sarah would approve of this scorched earth response, this refusal to let injustice slide. Or maybe she'd tell him he was being too harsh, that Rebecca and Morrison were just products of a sick system, that destroying their lives wouldn't fix anything. He'd never know. Sarah was 3 years in the ground, her opinions frozen at age 39, unable to evolve or change or respond to new situations. All Marcus had was his best guess at what she might say, filtered through grief and memory and wishful thinking. I hope so. Marcus ended the call. The Billings EMTs boarded the aircraft, carrying medical bags and trauma kits like they were responding to a plane crash instead of one man's wrist injuries. They led Marcus to a seat, cleaned the wounds with antiseptic that stung like fire, applied bandages and antibiotic ointment. One of them wanted to do x-rays, check for fractures. Marcus declined. Sir, with all respect, you have significant tissue damage. There could be. I'll get checked by my own doctors in New York. Just bandage it. Marcus watched them work, thinking about the optics. Injured CEO, blood-stained clothes, photos that would be everywhere by evening. Good. Let people see the physical evidence of what Rebecca had done. Outside, more vehicles arrived. FBI field office out of Great Falls, probably responding to the federal investigation that Tyrese had triggered. Montana State Police, looking confused and territorial. Airport security, way too late to matter. The circus was complete. Tyrese appeared at Marcus's elbow. Boss, Gulfstream is 20 minutes out. We can have you in Seattle by 2. Back in New York by 9 if you want. Seattle's canceled. Take me home.
I told Daniel I'd be back tonight.
Copy that.
Tyrese relayed orders into his radio, coordinating the ballet of resources that made Marcus's life possible. Also, media is requesting a statement. CNN, Fox, NBC, everyone. They want you on camera. Marcus considered. The smart play was silence. Let the lawyers handle everything, maintain plausible deniability. But smart wasn't always right. Sometimes you needed to go on record, needed to put your face and voice to the story before someone else wrote it for you. Set it up. 5 minutes at the bottom of the stairs. No questions, just a statement. The walk down the mobile stairs felt surreal. Above, passengers watched from windows, still processing what they'd witnessed. Around, tactical operators maintained perimeter security, rifles lowered but ready. Beyond, news cameras jostled for position, reporters shouting questions that blended into incomprehensible noise. Marcus stopped at the bottom step, turned to face the cameras. Tyrese stood just behind him, a silent promise of protection. The noise died down as people realized he was about to speak. My name is Marcus Wright. Today, I was racially profiled, falsely accused of theft, and physically restrained by Royal Meridian Airways crew members. Not because I committed a crime, not because I posed a threat, but because I am a black man who didn't look like their idea of a first-class passenger. He held up his bandaged wrists, let the cameras get a good shot. This is what happens when prejudice has power. This is what institutional racism looks like. Reporters erupted with questions. Marcus ignored them, continued. I'm fortunate. I have resources most people don't. I can hire lawyers. I can deploy security teams. I can buy the airline that discriminated against me. But most people can't do that. Most people who face this treatment have no recourse, no voice, no way to fight back. They just have to accept the humiliation and move on. He paused. Let that sink in. So I'm using my resources not just for myself, but for everyone who's ever been treated like I was treated today. Wright Airways will have the strongest anti-discrimination policies in the industry. 0 tolerance. First violation, you're done. No warnings, no second chances. You treat passengers with dignity, or you find a new job. More questions, louder now. One voice cut through. Mr. Wright, are you pressing charges? Civil suits against every individual involved. Rebecca Carlisle, Gary Hendricks, Captain Morrison, Veronica Ashford. Personal liability. They're going to learn that actions have consequences. What about criminal charges? Marcus paused, letting the question hang in the cold Montana air. Behind him, the 777 sat like a beached whale, passengers still pressed against windows, watching history being made in real time. Ahead, cameras clicked and whirred, capturing every micro-expression, every word that would be dissected and analyzed for days. I'm not interested in revenge. His voice carried across the tarmac, calm and final. I'm interested in consequences. Rebecca Carlisle, Gary Hendricks, Captain Morrison, they'll face civil suits, personal liability, but the real consequence is that they revealed who they are to the entire world. That recording will follow them forever. No amount of jail time changes that. He gestured to the bandages on his wrists, dried blood visible through white gauze. This will heal in a week. Their reputations won't heal at all. That's justice enough. One more question tried to break through the noise, something about settlements and money, but Marcus was already turning away. Tyrese fell into step beside him, a wall of protection that cleared a path through the chaos.
The Gulfstream G650 sat 50 yards away, engines already spooling, stairs extended like an invitation to escape. Marcus had been on this aircraft hundreds of times, flying to board meetings, to merger negotiations, to conferences where he was the only black face in rooms full of old white men who smiled too much and listened too little. The plane had always represented freedom to him, the ability to go anywhere on his own terms, to leave behind whatever situation had become unbearable. Today it represented something different, not escape, but arrival, not running from consequences, but flying toward the next phase of them. He climbed the stairs without looking back. Didn't need to. Montana was already receding into the past, becoming story instead of experience, transforming from trauma into ammunition. The cabin smelled like leather and coffee, and the particular silence that came with wealth. Soundproofing so complete you could almost forget you were moving at all. Marcus collapsed into his usual seat, the one that faced forward, that let him see where he was going instead of where he'd been. His wrists throbbed in time with his heartbeat, pain radiating up his forearms with each pulse. Tyrese settled across from him, laptop already open, fingers moving across keys with practiced efficiency. Legal team wants priorities. Who do we hit hardest? Marcus watched Montana drop away through the window. Mountains and plains and endless sky, the kind of landscape that made humans feel appropriately small, that reminded you the universe didn't care about your problems or your power or your net worth. Somewhere down there, Rebecca Carlyle was probably crying in a police station. Gary Hendricks was probably staring at lawsuit papers in disbelief. Captain Morrison was probably calling his union rep, trying to find some lifeline that didn't exist. They'd wake up tomorrow to discover their lives had ended. Not literally. They'd still breathe, still eat, still exist in the technical sense. But the lives they'd built, the identities they'd constructed, the futures they'd imagined, all gone. Erased by their own choices, by their willingness to humiliate someone they thought was powerless. All of them. Marcus's voice came out quiet, almost gentle, which made it more terrifying than shouting would have been. Equally. No mercy. No settlements that let them walk away clean. I want depositions. I want discovery. I want every email, every performance review, every complaint that got buried. I want the world to see the full pattern. Tyrese nodded, typing notes. Rebecca Carlyle has 3 prior complaints in her file. Inappropriate passenger interaction. All dismissed with warnings. Gary Hendricks has 2, one for profiling a family, another for aggressive behavior. Also dismissed. So the airline knew. Marcus leaned back, felt something cold settle in his chest. They knew these people had problems, and they kept them in customer-facing roles anyway. That's institutional liability. That's proof the rot goes deeper than individual bigots. Legal agrees. They're drafting claims against Royal Meridian corporate structure for negligent retention and supervision. Tyrese scrolled through more files. Also, Jennifer Park wants to know about the rebrand timeline. Stocks in freefall, down 31% now. Some investors are demanding emergency action. Marcus pulled out his phone, opened the trading app he rarely looked at. Royal Meridian Airways, ticker symbol ROYA, had transformed from stable blue chip to penny stock in 4 hours. The chart looked like a cliff, a straight vertical drop that represented billions in lost market capitalization. Somewhere, day traders were probably making fortunes on the volatility, algorithms buying and selling faster than human thought, profiting from chaos they didn't understand. Tomorrow morning, announce a $2.1 billion capital injection. New name, New branding, new executive team. Zero tolerance discrimination policy. First violation, you're done. No exceptions, no excuses. Marcus watched the numbers flicker and change, representing nothing real, just collective belief made temporarily solid. The market will panic for about 6 hours. Then they'll realize we're the only airline in America with actual values, and they'll buy in. We'll close higher than we started. And if we don't, then I'll buy out the remaining shareholders at a premium and take the company private. Marcus smiled without humor. Either way, I win. That's the advantage of having resources they can't imagine. I can afford to be right, even when the market's wrong. Tyrese made more notes, then looked up. Daniel called again while you were doing the press conference. Wants to know when you'll be home. The mention of his son cut through Marcus's analytical distance, reminded him that this wasn't just about strategy and revenge and corporate restructuring. This was about a 12-year-old boy who'd watched his mother die and now lived with the constant fear that his father might not come home either. Who'd seen the news today, seen his dad in handcuffs, and had to process that information with the brain still forming, still trying to understand how the world worked. Call him back. Put him on speaker. Tyrese dialed. The connection clicked through satellite relays and cellular towers covering 3,000 miles in microseconds. Daniel's voice came through small and worried. Dad? Hey, buddy. I'm on the plane. Coming home. Should be there by 8, maybe 9, depending on headwinds. Are you really okay? The question carried weight beyond its words, asking not just about physical injury, but about everything. About dignity, about safety, about whether the world was still a place where being smart and successful could protect you from hatred. Marcus looked at his bandaged wrists, at the blood seeping through gauze, at the physical evidence of what Rebecca Carlyle had done. He thought about lying, about telling Daniel everything was fine, about maintaining the illusion that dads were invincible. But Sarah had taught him better than that, taught him that kids deserved truth, even when truth was hard. I'm hurt. Not badly, but hurt. They put zip ties on my wrists and the plastic cut through skin. It'll heal. Marcus paused, choosing his next words carefully. But Daniel, I need you to understand something. What happened today wasn't random. It wasn't bad luck. It was people making assumptions about me because I'm black and I was wearing a hoodie. You're going to face the same thing someday, maybe already have. And when you do, you don't accept it. You fight back. Not with fists, but with everything else you have. You understand? Silence stretched for several seconds. Marcus could picture Daniel in the penthouse, probably sprawled on the living room floor with his laptop, processing information the way he processed code, breaking it into components, testing logic, looking for patterns. I understand. Daniel's voice came back, stronger, steadier. But Dad, next time, can you fight back from home? I don't like seeing you hurt on TV. The request landed harder than it should have, punching through Marcus's carefully maintained control. His son shouldn't have to worry about seeing his father brutalized on television, shouldn't have to grow up with that fear, with the knowledge that no amount of success or wealth could fully protect against the violence of assumption. I'll try. But sometimes you can't choose where the fight happens. Sometimes it chooses you. Marcus swallowed against something tight in his throat. I'll be home in a few hours. We'll order pizza. You can tell me about school. And maybe we'll watch something mindless on Netflix and forget today ever happened. Okay. Love you, Dad. Love you too, son. More than you know. The call ended. Marcus sat in silence, feeling the weight of fatherhood and responsibility and the impossible task of raising a black child in America. Every conversation was a tightrope walk between protecting innocence and preparing for reality, between letting Daniel be a kid and teaching him survival skills he shouldn't need. Tyrese had the grace to look away, to pretend he hadn't noticed Marcus's eyes getting wet. Boss, you want me to have the security detail meet you at home? Extra coverage for the next few days? No. Daniel doesn't need armed guards making him feel like a target. Marcus wiped his face with the back of his hand, careful not to disturb the bandages. Just normal protocols. Mrs. Patterson stays overnight in case I need to handle any late calls. The Gulfstream leveled off at 41,000 feet above most commercial traffic in that thin air where the sky turned darker blue and you could see the curvature of the earth. Up here, problems seemed smaller. Perspective shifted. Montana was already 300 miles behind them, shrinking to abstraction, becoming just another place Marcus had visited and left and would probably never see again. But the consequences were still spreading, rippling outward through systems and structures, touching lives he'd never meet. Somewhere, a law student was already writing a case study about Wright versus Carlisle. Somewhere, HR departments were updating their anti-discrimination training. Somewhere, a black teenager was watching the news and feeling something shift. The realization that fighting back was possible. That accepting abuse wasn't the only option. Tyrese. Marcus opened his laptop, pulled up the Boeing presentation he'd been working on that morning. The merger that had seemed so important 12 hours ago now felt distant and trivial, a problem from a different life. Cancel the Boeing meeting. Send my apologies. Tell them we'll reschedule when I'm ready. They're not going to like that. $8 billion deal. I don't care what they like. Marcus closed the laptop without saving. Today I got arrested for being black in first class. Tomorrow, I'm restructuring an entire airline to make sure it never happens to anyone else. Boeing can wait. If they can't handle that, they're not partners I want anyway. Tyrese nodded, made another note. The laptop screen reflected in his eyes. Blue light and scrolling text. The endless digital record of everything that had happened and everything that would happen next. Lawsuits and press releases and policy changes and stock movements. All of it documented and time-stamped and preserved forever in databases that would outlive everyone on this plane. Marcus thought about Sarah, about what she would say if she could see him now, bloodied and angry, and preparing to destroy people's lives with the same efficiency they'd tried to destroy his dignity. Would she approve? Would she tell him he was being too harsh, that grace was more important than revenge? He'd never know. Sarah was gone, her opinions frozen at 39, unable to evolve or adapt to situations she'd never faced. All Marcus had was memory and guesswork and the fading impression of her voice saying, "Don't let them make you small." He wasn't small, wasn't going to be made small. And the people who'd tried were learning that lesson in the hardest way possible. One more thing. Marcus pulled up his contacts, found Jennifer Park's number. Get me a meeting with the FAA next week. I want to talk about industry-wide standards for crew behavior. If Royal Meridian had problems, other airlines do too. This needs to be bigger than just my company. Tyrese looked up, something like respect crossing his face. You're going systemic. Damn right I am. Because this isn't about me. It's about every person who's ever been profiled, humiliated, brutalized by people in uniform who thought authority meant immunity. Marcus felt the words solidify into purpose, into mission, into something larger than revenge. We're going to change how this industry works. Not just one airline, all of them. The Gulfstream cut through thin air at 600 miles per hour, eating distance, carrying Marcus toward home and sun and the work that would define the rest of his career. Below, America sprawled in all its complexity and contradiction, beautiful and broken, capable of both incredible kindness and casual cruelty, a country that had never quite reconciled what it claimed to be with what it actually was. Marcus pressed his forehead against the cool window, watched the sun angle toward the horizon, painting clouds in shades of orange and gold and deep purple. In a few hours, he'd be home. In a few days, the lawsuits would be filed.
In a few months, the airline would be transformed. In a few years, maybe, the system would shift enough that another black man in a hoodie could fly first class without being treated like a criminal. That was the work. Not today's victory, satisfying as it was, but the long grind of institutional change, of policy and precedent and persistent pressure. The kind of work that took decades and outlived the people who started it. Sarah would have understood that, would have supported it.
Might even have led it if cancer hadn't stolen her away before she could finish what she'd started.
Marcus pulled out his wedding ring. He'd taken it off before the press conference, didn't want photos of it circulating, didn't want his grief commodified into content. The gold band sat heavy in his palm, worn smooth from 3 years of constant wear, engraved on the inside with words only he could read. Grace costs everything. Pay it forward. Sarah's philosophy in 8 words. The idea that extending grace to people who didn't deserve it was the hardest, most expensive thing you could do. That it cost pride and anger and the satisfaction of revenge, but that paying it forward, choosing dignity over destruction, was how you changed the world. Marcus had paid Rebecca Carlyle back today, had destroyed her career, humiliated her publicly, made her face consequences she'd spent 15 years avoiding. That was justice. That was fair. That was what she'd earned through her own choices. But grace? Grace would be what came next. Not forgiveness. She hadn't asked for that, probably didn't deserve it. But the choice to use his resources to fix the system that had created her, rather than just punishing the individual. The choice to transform Royal Meridian into something better, instead of just burning it down out of spite. That was the harder path, the more expensive one, the kind of work that cost everything and might not pay off in his lifetime. Marcus slipped the ring back on his finger, made a silent promise to the woman who'd taught him what grace meant, who'd lived it even when cancer was eating her alive, who'd never let hatred turn her heart. Tyrese. Yeah, boss? When we get back to New York, I want you to set up a foundation. Scholarships for kids who want to work in aviation but can't afford the training. Pilot school, mechanic certification, flight attendant programs, all of it. Full ride, no strings attached. Tyrese's fingers paused over his keyboard. You're serious? Dead serious. We'll fund it through Wright Airways profits. Every quarter, 10% of net income goes to the foundation. We'll start with 100 scholarships a year, scale up from there. Marcus could already see it taking shape, could imagine the ripple effects. In 10 years, maybe 20, the industry will have a whole generation of people who know what it's like to be excluded, who'll remember that someone gave them a chance when the system said they didn't belong. That's how you change culture, not by punishing the old guard, but by building a new one. Tyrese smiled, genuine and warm, the first real emotion Marcus had seen from him all day. Sarah would have liked that. Yeah. Marcus felt his own smile, smaller but real. She would have. The Gulf Stream flew on through darkening sky, carrying them home, carrying the weight of what had happened and the promise of what would come next. Behind them, Montana disappeared into distance and memory. Ahead, New York waited with Daniel and pizza and the work of rebuilding trust after trauma. Marcus closed his eyes, let exhaustion finally claim him, and dreamed of a future where kids like his son could fly first class in hoodies without fear, could exist in spaces that weren't designed for them, could be themselves without performing respectability or proving their worth to strangers who'd already decided they didn't belong. That future didn't exist yet, but he had resources, had anger, had purpose, and had just demonstrated exactly what happened when you underestimated a black man who looked powerless but wasn't. They'd learn, all of them, the hard way. And maybe, eventually, the world would shift enough that the lesson wouldn't need to be taught again.